then we'll be done. But James chapter 5, we just got one verse I want to cover today. And if you'll look at that, stand up and we'll read one verse. It's James chapter 5, verse 12. James chapter 5, verse 12. It says, "But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation." Might as well go to Matthew chapter 5 before you're seated. Matthew chapter 5, verse 33, Jesus says the same thing here. Matthew 5, 33. Trying to find Matthew 33, 5. There's no Matthew 33. Matthew 5, 33. "Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil." Lord, I pray you help us understand your word here and to think about the content here when it comes to making vows and oaths. And I pray that you'll apply it to our hearts. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, you could be seated, and I just want to talk about this one verse in James 5, and again, a biblical principle where it talks about not swearing. And it says, interestingly, it says above all, not swearing. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But our text, if you think about our text, James chapter 5, I'm trying to go through this, what we would call expository, like looking at it verse by verse and thought by thought and actually breaking it down. That's how we've gone through the book of James, as opposed to something that's more topical, like I'll often do, where I just think of a topic and we'll go to verses all over the place. We are going to go to verses all over the place, but in trying to break down this chapter, it really seems like this verse is just, it's like, what is that thrown in there for? You know, just all of a sudden it's there. But I believe that it fits in the context just perfect if you think about it. So let's break it down real quick. If you'll look at chapter 4, verse 13, we see that this new thought had come up where James says that we shouldn't be boasting ourselves of tomorrow. Proverbs 27 uses it that way. Do not boast yourself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. And that's basically what he's saying here in James chapter 4, verse 13. It says, "Go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow, we will go into such a city and continue there a year and buy and sell and get gain. Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow." And he goes on, "For ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that." And so he's bringing up this new point in his book here where he's saying, you know, don't lay up in your mind all these things that you're going to do and just boast yourself of it. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, without considering the fact that, you know, you can't do anything without God, and maybe God doesn't want you to do some of these things. And so something might come in your life where you don't meet certain ambitions that you thought you had, and it's just like, you know what, live your life thinking, well, if God wills, I'll do this and I'll do that. And it doesn't mean don't plan and don't have ambitions, but don't do that, you know, in the flesh, bragging about it and saying, this is what I'm going to do for your own glory, but rather you should think, what does God want me to do? And if it's his will, then I'll do this or that. That's the thought that he's bringing up here. And then he starts talking about those who are rich. So, you know, verse, he goes through there. Chapter 5 starts out, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl." And you might think that's a different topic, but what I think he's saying is those are the types of people, the ones who go after riches and all that. Those are the types of people he's talking about that would say, you know what, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to build this, and I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go there, and I'm going to travel over here. And it's usually somebody with wealth and somebody who's seeking after that type of a life or whatever that's going to think these things. So he addresses attention towards that type of a person who would do that. And he says, your riches are corrupted, your garments moth-eaten. And so he's saying you should rather mourn for what's going to come your way because you're seeking after the wrong thing. You should be seeking after the Lord and trying to serve him. And so it's a continuing thought. Chapter 5, verse 7, he then says, be patient, therefore, brethren. So he's saying, because I said all this, therefore, be patient. Don't live your life wanting these different things, but be patient. Know this, that sometimes you're not going to have things. Sometimes you're going to have persecution, and you're going to have trials and things that you don't want. They're saying, be patient through that. Keep serving the Lord, and wait for your reward in heaven. Sometimes he'll reward you on this earth for waiting. But you just need to be patient and not start, boasting yourself of tomorrow and not seeking after riches. All these kind of go together. And then finally he says, but above all things, my brethren, that's our text there in verse 12. But above all things, my brethren, swear not. And that seems kind of like a funny thing to say, but I believe that the point is that, that's like the worst way in which you could do this. Okay, it's not just, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to do that, but now you're actually signing contracts saying, I'm going to do this. And you're making vows. I swear that I'm going to go, and one day you just watch, mark my words. I'm going to, and all these things are dangerous because not only are you saying, I can make my own future, but you're saying, look, I don't care what God's will is for me. This is what I want. And you're making a vow and you're making an oath. That's a very dangerous thing to do. Okay, so above all, he's not saying like it's the most important thing in all the Bible is to not swear a vow. That wouldn't make any sense. There's a lot more important. Salvation for one thing. There's a lot of important things, but I think he's saying when it comes to this matter of not boasting yourself on tomorrow, this point is of the utmost importance. Don't swear. Don't get yourself involved in an oath or a vow or covenant or whatever. So in this case, it has to do with boasting of tomorrow. Don't swear and say that you're going to do certain things. So that's how it flows, I think, in this chapter. And if we instead are, if we're supposed to have the mindset that says, if God will, I'll do this. If God will, I'll do that. Then making a vow would be the exact opposite of that. Instead of saying, well, I'll do it if God allows me to, if God wants me to do it, instead we say, no, I'm going to do it no matter what. That's dangerous, and that's kind of saying, I don't care what God has to say. Now, there are some things that you consider, this is God's will, and you make a commitment to it, and I'm going to talk about those here in a minute, but there are other things that you're like, well, I can't commit to that. I can't vow that because I don't know. I don't know if it's God's will. So in this sermon, I want to look at some examples in the Bible of people who made these oaths and the concept of swearing, making vows, however you want to say it. And then I want to leave us just with some few thoughts that we can get kind of based off of those stories and this whole principle in general. So here are some examples of swearing in the Bible. And of course, I don't mean what we would call cuss words or bad words. It's funny, the word that we use for saying bad words, it's funny if you think about it. Curse words, swear words. Somebody says that's blasphemy or whatever. And if you think about it, like none of those are actually words that mean just a bad word, but they have to do with words that you use that become bad because you enter into a swearing or you do something like that. So like I'm not saying to go around just using what the world considers bad words, okay? But if you think about it, those are just words. Like just a word in and of itself doesn't hurt anything unless it gets you into a sin or something like that. Now, my perspective on that, the reason I've always tried to be careful not to, and I was raised not to say certain words because that's a bad word, is because I don't want to be an offense to anybody, and because, if the world says it's bad, why? And I do it, they're going to associate that with, man, he's being bad. You know, and if we teach our kids, hey, don't say that word, it might offend somebody, and then I just go flippantly just using those words, then that's not good. But the word in and of itself, I don't think is a sin. It's just a word. Words are used to express feelings or thoughts or whatever, and so you could say any word. You know, you could say a word. You know, any word could be a cuss word. If you decided, hey, this is going to be a cuss word. I've heard of Christian families doing that, where kids are like, they're not allowed to cuss, and so they create these cuss words, and they're allowed to use those words. And Christians have those words too, by the way. There's certain words we don't say that start with S, but we will say another word that starts with S, stink. Right? That's a cuss word if you think about it. It just depends on how you say it. You could swap that out with another word and it's still wrong. But, you know, I tell this, I don't know why I'm talking about this. It's not even part of the message. But I always tell the story about my kids, how they were saying, you know, somebody said, you know, I think a Sunday school teacher said darn or dang or something like that. And we had taught our kids not to say that, because that's kind of like saying another word. And anyway, didn't get into all the details. But they heard their Sunday school teacher said that, and they came back and said, my Sunday school teacher is cussing, using bad words. And we're just like, what kind of words? And then when they said that, it was kind of, oh, well, we don't typically think of that as a bad word. So it's a hard concept to teach kids. Why? Because it is a hard word a hard concept if you think about it. What makes a word bad? You know, so is it a curse word or a swear word, or, you know, anyway, so that's another, I'll have to preach a message on it again sometime. But examples of swearing, what I mean is literally entering into a covenant. And, you know, to some people, like, if I swear, to some people that's a curse word, which it kind of is. Like, you know, I swear to God. That's swearing. That's taking the Lord's name in vain and swearing, you know, by His name. And He says not to do that without, you know, and not mean it. So, anyway, all that to say this: examples of swearing in the Bible, and I'm talking about the, you know, in the right usage of the word. Number one, Esau. Esau swears his birthright. Right? If you remember that, Genesis chapter 25. Let's go there. Genesis 25. It seems like I brought this up recently. Genesis 25. Verse 33. And I won't tell the whole story again, but basically, long story short, Esau comes back from hunting and he's hungry, and so he makes a trade and he says, I'll take this lentil soup for my birthright, which was a big, important thing. It was kind of crazy that he gave that up. But it says in verse 33, and Jacob said, swear to me this day. And he sware unto him, and sold his birthright unto Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, I always forget that bread's involved there. Now, that does up the ante a little bit. Some good bread is valuable. All right, so anyway, this is an example here of somebody entering into another. Sure, you give me the lentils, and I'll give you my birthright. And he does end up giving his birthright. By the way, what you're going to find here real quickly is people in the Old Testament took swearing seriously. Even though it still isn't right that they would enter into these things, if they said they were going to do something, it was expected, hey, you're going to do it. And we're going to see that in these examples. So it wasn't like he could just backtrack and say, like, well, I know I said I was going to give you that, but, you know, I lied. You know, no, he gave it to him. And then later on, even though it says here in the verse, he despised his birthright, which is not saying, like, for some reason he just hated his birthright. And the birthright, by the way, was like giving a portion of the inheritance. The firstborn got a double portion, and then it was split among the others. And so he split evenly. And so, you know, he had the special inheritance. It also gave him the rights, you know, like he was the oldest son now because of Esau's trade. And so Esau, it says he despised his birthright. What it means is he just didn't hold it very valuable. He didn't care about it. It wasn't important to him. And so he was willing to trade that. Although what we see in the story, look at chapter 27. It seems like he did care about it, because in verse 27 he gets pretty upset that he's being cheated out of things here. Verse 34. So chapter 27, verse 34. And then Esau heard the words of his father. Now this is another time later where Jacob again, Jacob then tricks him out of the blessing from the father. Like he already got the birthright, and now he pretends to be Esau, and he gets a blessing from his father. Anyway, that's how the story goes. And when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with a great and exceeding bitter cry, and said unto his father, Bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, Thy brother came with subtlety, and hath taken away thy blessing. And he said, Is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me these 2 times. He hath taken away my birthright. Wait a minute, he didn't just take it away. You gave that up. And behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, Hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said unto Esau, Behold, I have made him thy Lord, and all his brethren have I given to him for servants, and with corn and wine have I sustained him. And what shall I do now unto thee, my son? And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. So here's this strong hunter, hairy man, the Bible says, and now he's before his father just bawling and weeping and being mad because his brother stole everything away from him. But guess what? He's the one that traded his birthright and entered into this covenant and lost that because of a decision that he made. And so we need to be very careful to make sure before we enter into any contract, like, hey, this could be an important thing, and we want to make sure that we're very careful about that, and not just flippant about it. Now, nowadays, the reason people are so flippant about contracts because people don't care about going back on their word. There was a day where you could make a big business deal, and you could do it with a verbal contract. There's still some people that operate that way. I've got a verbal contract. Wait, this is being recorded. I probably shouldn't say this, but I got a verbal contract with the pastor in Kansas City for the building that we rent. There's nothing in writing on that. It's just something that we worked out between him and me. I like that. I think we should try to do that more often. The problem is, they say now, if you don't get it in writing, it's going to come back on you because people aren't honest. And so I remember hearing when I was in Oklahoma City that Oklahoma City and I think it was Tulsa had a deal. Oklahoma City would get all of the 7-Elevens, and Tulsa would get all the, I can't remember if it was On-Q or Q, yeah, QT, because On-Q they have in Oklahoma City as well. But QT and 7-Eleven made up this deal, and to this day you won't find a 7-Eleven in Tulsa, and you won't find a QT in Oklahoma City. And from what I've been told, there was never anything written. It was just a verbal agreement, a handshake, and they've honored it all these years. And so, there was a day when a person's word was all you really needed. But now you need to get it in writing and all that stuff. But it's still a contract, really. If you say, hey, I promise I'm going to do this, I swear I'm going to do it, whatever, that's a contract. Regardless of what the legal system says, that's a contract. Because it doesn't mean anything to people. Now they put it into writing as an official contract that later on they can take to court and whatever. But your word, if you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. Let's look at Numbers chapter 30. Here's another place in the Bible where it talks about this concept, and that's in the law of Moses, where God tells him how to respond to this situation. Numbers chapter 30. And there's a whole lot here. I'm going to go ahead and read through it. I hope you don't get too, I hope you don't lose concentration. I'll try to point some things out as I'm reading it. But here's basically what Moses is given in the law concerning making vows. And Moses spake unto the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. If a man make a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond. By the way, what you're going to find is that every time somebody gets into one of these contracts, it's a contract with the Lord. It's not just like, nobody else knows about it, but this is just a silent vow I have with the Lord. No, it's saying when you enter into a contract, you're basically entering into that in the Lord, which is why people would say, I swear to God, or raise your right hand, do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth? so help you God. I mean, you're basically saying, as God is my witness, I'm making this covenant. So every vow that you make essentially is to God, okay? But vow unto the Lord or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond. He shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceedeth out of his mouth. Now, what happens if he does break his word? As far as I can tell, the Bible doesn't say. I don't see anywhere that it says if a man promises to do something and he doesn't do it, you need to take him out and stone him or anything like that. It doesn't say. But what we do find is that people took it very seriously. So I assume it was just an understanding that, hey, if somebody goes back in his word, you're going to make him pay for that. You're going to make sure that he gets that right. It's just not something that they could necessarily take before the elders. Now, I might be wrong. I might start reading here a little bit and be like, oh, never mind. But that's the way I understand it. I don't see a place where there's a particular judgment put upon those who break their covenant. Now, here's an interesting thing. It says in verse 3, if a woman also vow a vow unto the Lord, and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, and her father hear her vow and her bond wherewith she hath bound her soul, and her father shall hold his peace at her, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond whether she hath bound her wherewith she had bound her soul shall stand. But if her father disallow her in the day that that he heareth, not any of her vows or of her bonds wherewith she hath bound her soul shall stand, and the Lord shall forgive her because her father disallowed her. So say, my daughter's still living at home, which she is, and so she decides, to get in some kind of contract with somebody and says, you know what, I swear that if you'll give me this or that, then I'll pledge, let's say it's money. I'm going to pledge so much money a month to do this, whatever. And I hear her say that, and I'm like, no. She doesn't vow that. Then she's supposed to be released from that according to this text here. And she is forgiven of that. Don't hold that over her head. I'm the one that said, no, I'm not going to allow her to do that. And you would say, that just seems so, anti-feminist. I mean, I don't know what the word is to use, but that just sounds so. But here's the thing. The father was in complete charge of the children, because I think it would be the same thing for the man, that was living in the household of his father. He was in charge of what went on. He was the one that was taking care of them and supplying for their needs and doing all those kinds of things. So he had every right to say yes or no on this subject. And so if they entered into this thing, this was going to affect their life for a long time, and maybe forever. And so he had that right to stop that if he heard it. Okay, and so it has to do with the children. The father had the authority to stop that vow. But also the wife. Verse 6 says, and if she had at all in a husband, when she vowed, or I think that's where we left off. When she vowed or uttered aught out of her lips wherewith she bound her soul, and her husband heard it and held his peace at her in the day that he heard it, then her vows shall stand, and her bonds wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. But if her husband disallow her on the day that he heard it, then he shall make her vow which she vowed, and that which she uttered with her lips, wherewith she bound her soul, of none effect, and the Lord shall forgive her. So the same thing with the wives. And again, I know that's a touchy subject in our world today, but that's the way God saw it in the commandments that he gave Moses in those days. But every vow of a widow, right? There's a lady that's on her own, lost her husband, and of her that is divorced, wherewith they have bound their souls, shall stand against her. So if they're on their own, if they're the head of their own household, that's a different subject. And if she vowed in her husband's house, or bound her soul by a bond with an oath, and her husband heard it and held his peace at her and disallowed her not, then all her vows shall stand, and every bond wherewith she bound her soul shall stand. But if her husband shall utterly make them void on that day that he heard them, then whatsoever proceedeth out of her lips concerning her vows or concerning the bond of her soul shall not stand. Her husband hath made them void, and the Lord shall forgive her. Every vow and every binding oath to afflict the soul, her husband shall establish it, or her husband shall make it void. But if her husband altogether hold his peace at her from day to day, then he established it, all her vows or all her bonds which are upon her. He confirmeth them, because he held his peace at her in the day which he heard them. But if he shall anyways make them void after that he hath heard them, then he shall bear her iniquity. These are the statutes which the Lord commanded Moses between a man and his wife, between father and daughter, being yet in her youth in her father's house. So anyway, I'm pointing out that this is a big portion of Scripture that deals with this situation. And you might apply that to your house today. Something that I saw a lot growing up is children. And again, this subject is going to come up tonight, Lord willing. I sure hope this works out. If not, it'll be next week or something. But I really want to preach this. People get this feeling sometimes, and they equate that to, the Lord told me to do this, when really it's just their emotions saying that they should do this. And we've got to be so careful as churches and as pastors. We've got to be very careful not to manipulate people into doing something and claiming that it's God telling them to do it. And so what I grew up with, there's a lot of emphasis on like faith promise and just giving sacrificially and all that. And I'm not 100% against that. But what I am against is people like trying to maneuver the message and everything to make people feel bad until the point where they give. And what that would cause people to do is, little kids, like, they don't have a real understanding of the value of money. And so, preacher starts preaching on giving, and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what, God's told me to give this. And so they'll just give all this money. Now, the father could say, whoa, that's not, no, you're misunderstanding. But I think I should give it. No, you shouldn't. You should hold on to that. And guess what? That kid that did that and his father said, no, don't do that, that kid's not going to be condemned from God because he made this vow and then he broke it. See what I'm saying? Because his father said, no, you're not going to make that vow. I think today you could still do that. God's going to, not hold it over anybody. And on the other hand, if you make it a decision based on emotion and you do it, this is something that recently came up. I had to talk to somebody about, don't stress about it. Think I was manipulated, blah, blah, blah. Because here's the thing. God knows your heart. And if you gave something because you felt like the Lord was having you do it, God knows that. And God's going to bless you for that. And the person who manipulated you for bad purposes, he's going to deal with them negatively. All right? So don't worry about, I was tricked, I was deceived. Well, God will work that all out. He'll fix that all out in the end, okay? But, if you're making unwise decisions, we've got an older lady in the church who's not here today, but she comes to me from time to time and says, somebody sent me this piece of mail asking for money. Somebody called me on the phone asking me for money. And throughout her life, she's given a lot of money to these organizations because they make her feel bad or they make her think that she needs to do that. So she's got to the point now where she'll come to me and say, what do you think about this? And quite honestly, before I even look at it, I'm like, no, don't do it. Because people are all tricking you and they're trying to cheat you out of your money. And that should never happen, okay? But if she did do that out of the goodness of her heart for the right motivation, and, I believe God's going to bless her and God's going to, punish those people somehow or another. So, definitely it seems like pastors and evangelists and missionaries that would use that, they're really going to reap that, what they've sown. All right, let's go to the next one. Jephthah, Judges chapter 11. Judges chapter 11. Starting in verse 30. Judges 11, verse 30. So Jephthah is one of the judges here who's fighting battles for the Lord, and he goes and he's fighting against this other nation. I'm trying to just really paraphrase this. And it says in verse 30 here that Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, if thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hand, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth out the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Now, if he just said, and I will give it to the Lord, that wouldn't have been that big of a deal. And I might have thought, like, well, okay, what he's saying is that, if one of my children come out of the door or whatever, then I'll just give them to the Lord and say, God, his life, kind of like Hannah, gave Samuel to the priest, and he went full-time into the ministry, basically. Like, I'm just giving him to the Lord. But he didn't say that. He said, I will offer it up a burnt offering. Now, what kind of man is going to say, whatever comes through my door? Like, maybe he was thinking an animal come through, because I've been told that a lot of times they used to have animals like on the ground level, and they would live up on the top level, and so that the animals, because they didn't have a barn, so they could come out of the cold or whatever, they could be in there. All you animal lovers who have pets in your house, there you go. I gave you a verse. But I still don't want pets in my house. That could be a possibility. Maybe he thought an animal was going to come out whenever he came, or the dog's going to come out, and he was going to burnt offering, right? Some people would be more offended by that than children. But this was still a crazy vow. I don't care however you look at it, a crazy vow. Whatever comes through that door, I'll sacrifice up to you as a burnt offering. Now, to make a long story short, if you don't know how this goes, his daughter comes out through the door. Now, I'm thinking any reasonable person would be like, oh, God, sorry. That was a stupid vow. Punish me however you want to, but I'm not going to offer my daughter a burnt sacrifice. But the story goes, now some people have said, no, he didn't really offer her a burnt sacrifice, but he just, made sure that she stayed a virgin forever. And if you read the context, I see where they get that. But I'm convinced, as I read the context and some key words there, that he did what he, according to his vow, which means he offered her up as a burnt sacrifice. Now, either way, it was a bad vow. And he felt so strongly that and even the daughter said, hey, whatever you vowed, do it. Don't go back on what the Lord said to do. And so that just shows you how important it was back then that they kept their word after they vowed something. But still crazy, and still to this day something that I would say, never mind, God. I mean, you say that, that's terrible. Maybe it's just because we don't have the same value that they did back then when it comes to making a vow. But who in the world would offer their daughter sacrifice? It's crazy. But that's one of the craziest things here. Here's some other crazy vows that are similar. Reuben, we won't go there. But remember when Joseph is in a pit, and so he gets sold into. Eventually ends up in Egypt, and Joseph rises up in power. And then his brothers come to him, and they don't know that it's him. He knows that it's his brothers, but his brothers don't know that it's him. And he's like, they're coming asking for food because their land's in a famine. And Joseph's looking at his brothers who put him in a pit and sold him into slavery and all that kind of stuff. And he's looking at them, and he's like, I'm going to mess with them a little bit. So he tries to make it look like, they stole something. And so he wants them to live in fear a little bit. And so one of the things he does is says, oh, you have another brother at home? Why don't you go bring him to me? And then we'll move forward with this. And so they're like, oh, what are we going to do? Our father, he already lost Joseph. He's not going to want to give Benjamin as well. And so then they're trying to convince I get these names mixed up. They're trying to convince Jacob, their father, to let them take Benjamin into Egypt and leave him with the rulers there in Egypt. And so Reuben makes this statement. He's like, Father, if I take Benjamin and something happens to him, you can kill my children. Which is stupid on a couple different levels. Number one, they're his grandchildren. If I lose your child, you can kill your grandchildren. That's just ridiculous. But not only that, that's a dumb vow, because now, can you imagine if something really did happen to him, and now you've got to offer up your children? Of course, people say those kinds of things like, on my mother's grave, or, kill me if I'm wrong, or whatever, and they're not really realizing the full force of what they're saying. And they're just assuming, this is why it doesn't really mean, how many times in the court they say, oh yeah, I swear to tell the whole truth, and they're going to get up there and perjure themselves. How do you say that? They're going to tell lies, all the way through, because they don't really care about an oath, and they're swearing before God that they're going to tell the truth, and then they tell lies, okay? Because we live in a society that doesn't care much about that. All right, let's move on to another example. Uh, there's also a time, a similar situation, we won't look at that closely, but where people would say things like, God, do so to me. Let's see, how would they say? Do so to me also if this doesn't happen. Like, I'm going to make sure this happens, and if it doesn't, then God do unto me what happened. And just crazy. That's just a crazy thing to vow. Look at Acts chapter 23. I love this one. And then I'm going to wrap it up with some just principles real quickly. We'll look at these principles. Acts chapter 23. Acts chapter 23, starting verse 11. This is when, they're really getting heavy on the persecution of Paul and trying to put him in prison, actually trying to kill him is what they're trying to do. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. Okay, so God's will is that he will preach the gospel in Rome. So he's not going to let anything happen to him before he gets to Rome. God's going to protect him because this is his will. This is what he wants him to do. And he's actually telling Paul that. Now, can't think of very many instances where anybody in this room has heard God say, I'm going to perform X, Y, Z. Other than reading the Bible, you can see some things that God has promised. But Paul should be pretty confident at this point. Nothing's going to happen to me because God said I'm going to be in Rome. This is why even whenever he's shipwrecked and everybody's panicking and they're running around the ship like crazy and he's just resting and he's like, hey, calm down. God already said we're going to be okay because he's trusting the Lord. And when it was day, certain of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under a curse, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. That's quite a thing to swear. I'm telling you what, I'm not going to eat or drink until I kill that man. Well, after about a week, without eating or drinking, and Paul's still not dead, they don't even have the strength to kill him if they wanted to kill him. But I suspect they probably went back on their vow on this one. They probably ended up eating and drinking because Paul never dies. And they were more than 40 which had made this conspiracy. And so it's kind of crazy, the examples in the Bible where we see people making vows and keeping them, and some people making vows which they probably didn't keep. But still, nonetheless, they shouldn't have made those vows. Let me just go over a few principles here. Okay, number one, swearing to something and then breaking that vow is not something to take lightly. So if you make a vow and you swear to that, I'm going to perform that. God is your witness. God really does know that you're making that vow. And he does take it seriously. You should take it very seriously. And some of the examples where we might enter into a vow is, for instance, a marriage vow. You say, oh, well, you shouldn't make vows then. Well, there are some vows that we need to make. There are some vows, you enter into a relationship and you get married to somebody. That's a vow before God. This is why it's not only a legal document that you sign and say that we're going to do this. I don't know what it says now. I can't remember, but the vow that somebody makes. Now, sometimes I've heard that they've changed vows, and I've heard some people say some weird things that people have that they've heard people say to their vows. But it used to be till death do us part. Now sometimes people will make their vows and they'll be like, until things don't work out or something crazy because they know that it's probably not going to last. But a marriage vow is something saying, hey, till death do us part, we're in this, we're together, and it's a very important thing. Which means if you're going to make that vow before God and you're going to get married, you better make sure that it's the right one. But it is something to take seriously. How about your commitment to an employer? I remember when I worked at UPS, we made our employees give us a year commitment, which was kind of a joke because nobody cared that they gave you that commitment. But I did. If I told them I'm going to work for a year, no matter what, even if I had a better job offer or whatever, I'd try to work both jobs or whatever. But if I told them I'm going to work for a year, I'd work for a year. And that's an important thing. I believe that's a contract, and it's going to really show the integrity of a person if they say they're going to do something like that and then they don't do it. Now, we never made them sign anything or swear on the Bible or anything But still, I'll get to that here in a minute. But still, it's a commitment. How about you get a loan on something? You're going to make payments. You got a student loan or a hospital bill or something like that, and you promise to pay it. You ought to pay it. You ought not think that, oh, it's no big deal. I just had to lie so that I could get the loan, but I don't really care about paying it back. That's stepping on my own toes in a couple areas, to be honest, over the years. But that's not good. We should be people as Christians who keep our vows. God's watching, and we will reap what we sow. Principle number 1, swearing to something and then breaking that vow is not something to take lightly. Number 2, making hasty vows almost always affects other people. Now, I suppose there's some situations where you could say, I made a vow to the Lord between me and him, like maybe you're going to fast or something like that, and you never fast. Probably didn't affect anybody. Maybe it did, spiritually speaking, your prayers or something, I don't know. But typically when you make a vow, make a covenant, it's going to have to do with somebody else. Like making a vow that says, I'm going to sacrifice the next thing that comes through my you just pronounce somebody's death, entering into an agreement, a financial agreement on a loan or something like that. If you don't pay that back, it's going to affect that person that you're not paying back. So not only is it not right because you lied whenever you're basically saying as God is my witness, I'm going to perform this, but now you're also affecting other people and hurting them because you went back on your word. So the third principle is this: it's best never to vow anything at all if we can help it. And that's basically what James is saying, and that's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5. It's not that there is never an opportunity to make a vow. There's sometimes where we have to make vows, but it's better if you don't get into any kind of agreement like that or covenant like that, and instead you just do what you say you're going to do, not as a promise, not as a covenant. Hey, you know what? I'll have that for you tomorrow. I'm gonna try my best. If everything goes all right, what I mean. All the things you can say to kind of give yourself out of making an absolute promise, but then you just go through with it. And all of a sudden you're a man or a woman of your word, then people actually trust you. There doesn't have to be any legal binding contract or something like that. Just be a man of your word or a woman of your word that does what they say they're going to do. Go back to James chapter 5 and we'll close with the second part of that verse. James chapter 5:12. So he says, but, so he basically says, don't swear by heaven or earth or whatever, but let your yea be yea and your nay nay, lest ye fall into condemnation. If you just say, hey, I need this by the morning, okay, I'll do my best. And then you said that, so now go get it accomplished. But don't get yourself into this covenant. I swear I'm going to. Or whatever, anything like that is going to lead you into possible condemnation and lead you into evil. I can't remember the exact way Jesus said it, but same principle. So let's all stand, be dismissed in prayer, and I hope that just makes us all realize the importance of entering into contracts and having agreements and making vows. Be very careful about it. Not to say that you can never vow something, but for the most part, you should try to get out of doing that unless it's a serious thing. And if it has to be something that you're going to make an agreement like that, a vow, make sure it's of the Lord. Make sure it's the Lord's will that you do it. For instance, marriage or whatever. That way your covenant is with God. You're going to keep that. You need to keep that anyway. So otherwise, you're going to be asking for trouble. Father, we thank you for your word and many illustrations that we've just gone over of other people who have gotten into these certain situations that we can learn by that. Help us to learn from the mistakes of others and not go down and make the same mistakes. It's such a human tendency to do that. But Father, I pray that you just help us learn from the many examples you give us in Scripture. And help us just read the law that you gave to Moses and the advice from Jesus and James help us just to acknowledge that and to heed that so that we won't get ourselves into trouble and we won't have to learn the hard way. Father, be glorified and blessed by the preaching of your word. Help us as we go our separate ways. Keep us safe and be glorified in other messages and services today. And in Jesus' name I pray.